Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss what I see as the pressures pulling in both directions on Rishi Sunak's attempts to finalise the practical implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and how it seems both inevitable but also impossible that he'll be announcing agreement anytime soon. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, this is really about trying to set out what I see as the pulls in both directions, because you read some accounts and it's like, oh, there's going to be an announcement next week. You really do get that impression. But you consider some hurdles that need to be cleared and you think, well, how is that actually going to work? Getting a final settlement on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol is a glittering prize indeed for Rishi Sunak. It would represent the first achievement of his administration. Being honest, if he gets this over the line, it might well be the only achievement he can reasonably claim before the election. There isn't really anything else on the horizon. There are a few fake ones, like he can claim credit for halving inflation, even though it was going down anyway. He may get a boost if Russia is finally defeated in Ukraine, although, there's still going to be a lot of mess there. And that has no more to do with him than it was Boris Johnson. He's simply not obstructing efforts. But in terms of genuine achievements, in terms of something he's done that wouldn't have happened with someone else in place, the Northern Ireland Protocol could be it. It also comes with other advantages as well, including a possible visit with the President of the United States. UK Prime Ministers set a lot of value on such events, and Sunak will not want to be the first Prime Minister since I don't even know when to miss out on a visit to or from the sitting US President, if you don't count Liz Truss. It could also be a path towards establishing some sort of authority in his party, but I may come to that later. First, I want to discuss the three groups of people that basically stand in the way of a deal now. Boris Johnson's allies, the ERG and the DUP. Now, in point of fact, there are numerous Northern Ireland unionist groups who have major objections, and some of them are more hardline than even the DUP. But Sunak could afford to ignore the others if he has to. Without agreement with the DUP, though, there may not be a Stormont Assembly this side of the election. But Boris Johnson's allies first, because these are the simplest to explain. The last thing Johnson wants is for Sunak to succeed where he failed. And so easily as well. Sunak will have taken a matter of weeks to do what Johnson couldn't manage in several years. I see reports that Johnson's agitating about possible concessions with the deal. He's reported to be writing an op-ed in some newspaper designed to undermine Sunak's efforts. I'll bet he is. He will want to sink Sunak's chances of a victory. He will no doubt claim that he had it all under control. If he'd have remained in position, he'd have dealt with it all without having to concede anything to the EU. He will cite the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which started its passage through Parliament under his stewardship, as evidence that he was prepared to simply dissolve the protocol if it came to that. It's cobblers, of course. Everyone in his party knows he wanted to water down the bill, and that he backed away from the threat of a trade war with the EU in 2021, causing his Brexit sidekick David Frost to resign a few weeks later. But the truth and Boris Johnson are rarely in the same room at the same time. But the point is that Johnson will agitate against the deal with his parliamentary party, and a rebellion could be on the cards. In theory, Sunak could face that rebellion down. I'm not convinced I've seen anything in his character that would be willing to do so, but this is a pretty good prize for him. Then we come to the second obstacle, the DUP. Now, obviously, the DUP do not want the protocol at all. In fact, they keep talking as if, we're renegotiating the Northern Ireland Protocol itself. And it's like, no, we're not. We're negotiating the practical implementation. The protocol's not changing. But how would they react? Let's say they see the writing on the wall and they go, look, the government are going to go ahead with this. They're not going to use the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. They're not going to go for any unilateral action because the UK government cannot afford a trade war with the EU. It's particularly damaging right now as well with your war in Europe. It's a non-starter. That some sort of agreement has to be reached. That agreement has to be bilateral. Might they be more reasonable? Well, DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is sounding more helpful, though hardline in his party are probably going to make the agreement impossible. But there is an interesting angle here. Trade expert David Hennig made the excellent point that the DUP may just prefer to wait for a Labour government to form. Now, this sounds odd because the DUP are basically Northern Irish Tories, but it's all to do with what the main unionist objections to the protocol are. You know, for some it is just ideological and there's no real getting around that. But for many, it's the physical checks which represent a visible barrier between Britain and Northern Ireland, which is not replicated between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. You know, consider that the Good Friday Agreement worked by making the border inside Ireland sort of melt away. In practical terms, it made it basically invisible. Well, now a border has popped up inside the UK. What you want is some way to make that border largely melt away. But the purpose of the protocol checks is to take account of the fact that the UK market has separated from the EU single market and that the UK wants to lower standards. The more the standards of the two markets diverge, the greater the risk of lower standard goods ending up in the higher standards market. So the checks become more important and in this case more in your face. But Labour are not interested in lowering standards. They have laid out Brexit policies which include UK-wide alignment of standards with the EU and veterinary agreements. Now this will be helpful for all GB trade, but especially so with Northern Ireland. You know, just to emphasise, I'm talking about standards controls and checks here. Customs controls is another issue, but I don't get the impression that that's a major issue for most people, other than a few nutters who don't seem to understand it anyway. What we need to do is make the standards checks appear to largely go away, be unnoticeable. And the way to get them to go completely, of course, is to be part of the same market. Then there'd be no need for them. Now, there are lots of obstacles to rejoining the single market, but the main political one in Britain is the issue of freedom of movement. Labour, for example, have ruled this out in the next Parliament. However, we already have freedom of movement between Britain and the entire island of Ireland. You know, that predates our common membership of the EU and continues afterwards. So with Labour, all the ingredients to make the standards checks largely melt away is there, and in a way that can never be with the Tories. So we may have a situation where the DUP might, in theory, accept Sunak's deal if they thought there was no other way, but they could look at it and go, well, we'd have to look like we're conceding to accept Sunak's deal here because there are certain things set in stone. Whereas with Labour, you know, it's much better. We could just wait it out. It's like a year and a half before the election. Let's just wait it out. So then the final group are the ERG. Now, Sunak can face down Johnson's allies and he can face down the DUP. Getting an agreement without the DUP's blessing is messy. It's definitely suboptimal because he won't get the power-sharing executive running again. But if Sunak wants his achievement and his pat on the back from President Biden, then he may have to do so. The ERG are a different prospect. They not only have the numbers to sink his votes in Parliament, but he's placed several of them into cabinet positions. He's made himself very vulnerable to them. The idea of really standing up to the ERG seems fanciful. His government is not going to get anywhere if there are suddenly multiple cabinet resignations all at once and he can't get his budget passed this spring. In fact, if the ERG act together, they can bring his government down because a government that cannot pass a budget cannot govern. So realistically, Sunak needs to negotiate with them. If he's going to get his deal, he will need to basically buy the ERG off. Now, can it be done? I don't know. I suppose I can't. There are, again, it comes down to the ideological objections. There's no getting around those. But from a practical point of view, do the ERG really care about the Northern Ireland Protocol? Beyond the ideological concerns, do they fundamentally care? Not really. Their aim is to deregulate Britain. They're not that bothered about Northern Ireland. So there is a possibility. That being said, someone from the ERG has said that they will be in full agreement with the DUP, that they are in lockstep in terms of their assessment of the deal. So that sounds tricky to me. But then there is a lot of optimism for an announcement next week, maybe Tuesday. But so what if Sunak could get the agreement of some in the ERG? Let's say they're not totally united on this. They don't necessarily act as one. And if Sunak is going to announce a deal and he's ready to face down detractors in his party, Next week is absolutely the ideal time to announce it. If the ERG are going to throw their toys out the pram, or even just some of them, and he is prepared to ignore them, there is no better time to let them do that than next week. Why? Because it will be the anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Guess what the media is going to be focused on next week? It will not be a handful of Tory MPs whining about a deal that they campaigned and voted for. Basically, if Sunak wants this deal, and if he wants his visit with Biden, then there is no deal which will placate Johnson's cronies because they just want him to fall and let their buffoonish messiah back in. I'm not sure about the ERG because maybe they could be bought off with something else, but I don't see how giving them the retained EU law bill to do with as they wish helps him. And he will not get agreement with the DUP, or I find it very, very difficult to believe he will. Like, as I say, their leader, Jeffrey Donaldson, he is sounding like a man who wants to agree something, but also who knows his party's really not going to get behind him if he does. Sunak's going to have to ignore the DUP, I think. But that means accepting that Stormont will remain in mothballs for some considerable time. Not entirely sure what the full political ramifications of that would be. It's happened before, before several times. But so many people are reporting, from the talks, a real sense of optimism that a deal is coming. So maybe Sunak has decided he's going to get this deal across the line come what may, that he's trying to get agreement where he can, but ultimately he's already decided that where he cannot get agreement, he will just go, well, okay then, I'm having my deal. Be interesting to see. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.